Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today is a continuation of the mini-series that we're doing within the show where I'm interviewing all of my collaborators from my most recent record, Between Love and Fascination. And my next guest is David Mesquitic, who is one of my dearest friends and has been my primary collaborator for the past 5 years. I'm constantly inspired by David's playing. The way that he just brings such energy and such ingenuity to the bandstand every single night is really something to take note of. And I've learned so much about what it means to be an active collaborator over these past 5 years, working so closely with him. In this episode, we talk about how David approaches creating and finds the musical parallels to the mind-body-spirit connection. We talk about the process of making records and the learning curves, as he already has one record under his belt as a band leader and is currently working on the second that is a bit of an homage to Nat King Cole and Nat King Cole's trio. And we also talk about a harrowing gig from hell that kept the musicians on their toes, not really sure what was going to happen until sunrise, only for him to be able to go straight to church as soon as he got home. So stick around to the end. This, I think, takes the cake as the craziest gig story that we've had on the show thus far, and I'm not really sure there's going to be much that's going to top this one, but you never know. I'm always surprised with these guest stories. So anyways, moving on to the releases of the week. Of course, just like we talked about, David has his first album as a band leader out, which is called Preamble, and that came out in 2019, and it features Ben Treesh on bass, Fabio Augustinus on drums, and then has some guests of Matthew Maldonado on saxophone, and then I am a guest on the tune Like Someone in Love, and of course, David Mesquitic on piano. So you can go and support that record on all of the streaming services like Apple Music and Spotify. If you want to support it even more, then you can buy it on the iTunes store, and he also has physical copies available for sale as well, and you can reach him through his Instagram handle, which we put down below. So just shoot him a DM, and he'll make sure to figure out how he can ship you a CD or a meet safely and get you one of those. So now moving on to the next release of the week. This is an album that has two band leaders, and it is by two of the most beloved jazz musicians that we have here in Austin. This is from Andre Hayward and Chris Jones. Chris Jones was one of the first bassists that I had met once I really started playing in Austin, and Ben Treesh was my main guy at that time, but every time he was out, I made sure to give Chris a call. He is one of the nicest, most encouraging guys and a killing player. He went to Oberlin University and the New School in New York City, and has just done tons of tours and is an incredible musician, and that paired with his longtime collaborator and friend Andre Hayward, who is an extraordinary jazz trombone player who has played with the Jazz Ensemble Center Orchestra, played with Roy Hargrove, played and recorded with Betty Carter. I mean, are you kidding me? This is one of the most killing dudes in the whole city and one of the best trombone players in the nation for sure. So check out their record, which is called Way Back Home. And that is available. That came out in 2018, and you can find that on Bandcamp if you want to support it directly, and it's also on all of the streaming services as well. It really is just an incredibly healthy, balanced record of originals, and it highlights all the best qualities, not only in the band itself, in the whole band, but also whenever it comes to its two band leaders. So make sure to go and support that. I listened to it all today. It's really just a fantastic record. So anyways, that'll keep you busy for the next week, listening to those two records, really kind of just soaking it in, bathing in those two. And then if you need some more music and you want to hear some live excitement of things that are going on right before your eyes, you can head over to Monks, which we plug those shows every week. Colin Shook, pianist in town, and has just really cultivated and curated an incredible thing over there at Monks, 4 years strong, and finally has a brick and mortar with COVID where he can safely put on shows that can be live streamed into the ease of your own living room. All you have to do is go to that webpage and you got the music, and if you want to tip the band, you can do that. It's your prerogative. If you can't do it, no worries. The music's still going to be there. So going down the list of the schedule, what we have on Friday, November 6th, which is tomorrow, is going to be Marcos Varela and the Mike Sailors Quintet. I don't know Marcos, but I know Mike, and anyone who's playing with Mike is going to be amazing. So I'm going to check out that show. You should too. That's at 7:30. All of these shows are always at 7:30. The next one is on Sunday, November 8th, and that is the Clay Downham Trio. Make sure to tune into that. It's a really killing band. I'm going to listen to it. You should too. And then, of course, on Tuesday, November 10th, is the next installment in Austin Jazz Society's Project Safety Net series. Again, Austin Jazz Society doing the most with Project Safety Net, really taking care of all the jazz musicians that are at risk here in the Austin area or in the Austin city limits. They are making sure that jazz musicians are taken care of and can pay their bills until we can get back into a situation where we can be playing full time again and the world kind of spins a little faster towards what normal used to be. So anyways, this next installment of their Project Safety Net live stream series is going to be Elias Haslinger's Church on Monday, which is another institution here in Austin, a group that has had a long-standing residency at the Continental Club Gallery and has just played all around town. So support those guys, and if you can, donate to Austin Jazz Society's Project Safety Net. You would be doing an amazing thing, and it is a charitable donation to take care of some people who really need it right now. So thank you so much in advance for that. And then, of course, the final show that we're going to plug for this week is going to be a week from today, next Thursday. Both the episode of Off the Bandstand will air, and also live streaming at 7:30 will be my sextet. It's going to be Marco Antonio Santos on guitar. It's going to be David Mesquitic on piano, James Suter on bass, Fabio Augustinus on drums, and Matthew Maldonado on saxophones and whatever other woodwind instruments that he wants to bring with him. He can play them all. So that's going to be the Between Love and Fascination album release show. Finally, we get to give it a proper celebration, or at least as proper as we can while still being safe. So tune into that. That's going to be on Thursday, November 12th at 7:30 p.m. And we would love to see you there in the comments thread and all the things that we can do online. So anyways, that is it for today for all the announcements. Let's dive into today's episode. Here is episode 19. Hard to believe it's 19 already. Episode 19, David Mesquitic. This is Off the Bandstand. What's up, David? How are you?
Hey, Christian. How's it going?
Good, man. What have you been up to over quarantine stuff?
Yeah, wow. So that's been, 7 months now since March? A whole lot of something, but also a whole lot of nothing. But
you're teaching, right?
I am. I got an early childhood teaching gig with AISD right now. And so, it's fun. It's great. I'm working with kids. Well, I'm remote at the moment. So, but it's as good as I can make it so far. So yeah, it's a unique situation. That is for sure.
For sure. Well, man, you've been super busy with not to just immediately jump into the work that you've been doing on another record, but it also seems like you've just been almost equally hitting the shed with writing charts and also doing those backing tracks as you are with doing the teaching gig. So what was those backing tracks for people who haven't kept up? What were those backing track things you were working on?
Yeah, that, it's funny you mentioned that because that was a project, in the summer when I had more time in the day and, the teacher vibe of having summers off and waking up late and everything. Yeah. And so, I took it upon myself to do some backing track projects where, I'll play some accompaniment, something straight ahead, and a horn player can just YouTube, backing track for just typical Great American Songbook or, jazz repertoire that you would commonly hear at universities and such. And so I got through a couple of tunes, but you know, as soon as the school year began with the kids, it got so crazy. I rarely have time to even do those. And so yeah, right now I'm focusing on my next album,
Yeah.
which I'm excited to share in a couple of months. And so it's in the works, and all the charts are written. It's just a matter of, you know, getting people together during a pandemic and make some art. So,
Yeah. Man, so for people that don't know, I mean, and have been super excited to have you on because of the fact that, I mean, you were the first person who I asked, being that everyone kind of knows as us being very close collaborators in town and putting out records and just trying to play as much as possible. But at the same time, like, even though that we've worked together for a really long time, I don't really know what the transition was like from like growing up in McAllen and then coming to Texas State and then switching like instruments from like trombone being your primary instrument to piano, especially not only that, but like classical to jazz too. So I guess for people who don't know, like, what was that like coming up in South Texas and then like coming up here?
yeah, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you know, for those that aren't real familiar with me, I was born and raised in I like to call it a border town. It's basically a border town, McAllen, Texas, which is, I would say, maybe like about 15, 20 miles north of the border to Mexico. And so, you know, all my family is of you know, Mexican descent. And so I grew up in a dominantly, you know, Spanish speaking household. My mother only speaks Spanish, and I grew up, you know, in like bilingual classes. And, you know, it's funny because I tell people I learned English, you know, watching cartoons on Saturday morning of like the magic of the bus. Yeah. And that's how I picked up English, because Spanish was my first language, but I picked up English just by watching cartoons, similar to, you know, how you learn jazz. You learn the idiom just by kind of mimicking what you heard.
Yeah.
And so anyways, yeah, I was born and raised there. I did my undergrad at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, which was formerly known as University of Texas Pan American. Okay. I was the last graduating class before they did the whole, you know, rebranding and marketing, renaming of the university. Yeah. So that felt kind of special on one level. But yeah, when I was there, I was studying classical trombone. I was in no way, you know, jazz pianist aspiring, like nowhere in my radar did I even think about graduate school with jazz piano. Like I was thinking, you know, I'm going to graduate, get my music ed certification, teach band, which, I mean, I admire because we need those people in those fields. But, you know, there was a part of me where I picked the piano by ear at church when I was 15, which was, you know, 12 years ago. And, you know, no classical training, nothing, just, you know, here's a piano and learn hymns. And it was I like to call the church, it was a non-denominational Christian church, but it was very heavy on the Pentecostal side. So just a lot of praise breaks, you know, a lot of organ, like shouting, people dancing. And that was the environment in which I grew up in, and how I associate, you know, piano, or how I made sense of it, you know. And I like to tell people YouTube was my teacher at the time. Like I would just go on YouTube and, you know, put like XYZ cover or piano cover, and I would watch people's fingers and I would just mimic what they were doing. Sure. I really didn't know the theory. And then after a while, the labels to the sound started coming eventually. But
which is interesting too, though, because like, I mean, even though we don't necessarily think about it this way, but like 12 years ago on YouTube was still fairly new, like, because the internet is still fairly new, like within the past several decades. So did you find that you were able to find lots of piano material to teach or to be taught by, just like these videos, or were the videos a little bit more scarce that you really had to be like deep diving for that?
You know, to be honest, like a lot of the repertoire I was learning at the time were just hymns and like how I like to call, you know, CCM, contemporary Christian music.
Sure.
So, and what was nice is, you know, it was a Spanish speaking church. And for those of that don't know, there's a famous pop singer in Mexico called Luis Miguel. And I will never forget this story, but there was a pianist at the church who was obsessed and had this fascination for Luis Miguel. And so anyways, he was a killing like keyboard player all by ear. And he would get out, if you listen to Luis Miguel's music, there is a lot of jazz harmony influence, moving lines and like his, with the melody against the harmony and all. And anyways, all these musicians, like, they did their homework when it comes to learning their instrument. And so a lot of their music style was adapted in our Christian pop songs. And so I basically just learned, these pop songs with people doing covers on YouTube. And that was to the extent to which I was using YouTube as like my teacher. Sure. It wasn't until I started meeting some like gospel cats that like would travel and give conferences in South Texas when I really started being curious about, jazz harmony or, how that is structured. And so, but for the most part, yeah, it was just a lot of pop, like 4 chord progressions with like a little tritone sub here and there. But, it was just very like, it was all groove based music. And so if there's one thing I did learn, it's like, the spirit of when you perform a tune or why you're performing it or how how the chords like relate to the melody and the picture you want to paint. And so there's that like theatric artistic side to playing piano at church, which I'm in debt to, because it's like there's that saying, it's like take me to church. And there's a certain quality, and it's like you might not have to know everything, but it's like the spirit of that. And so you
can recognize it if you hear it. You're like, oh, right. That feels spiritual, or yeah.
Right. And it was funny because when I moved to Texas State, it's like there was these amazing people at the time, like just shredding all these bebop licks and everything. And at that time, like that was new territory for me, because I really didn't know what it really was at the moment, or at least the labels for it. And I always thought of like what my upbringings musically as something like, oh, that's not jazz. But in reality, it's the same 12 notes, and it's how you choose to, express yourself with those 12 notes. And, you can add all those elements. But anyways, yeah, the move to Texas State was something I did short after I mean, immediately after graduating from my undergrad, which was in classical trombone, which was a whole different world.
For sure. So like just going a little bit back, because I didn't want to interrupt that train of thought, but I had a question, was you said like you picked up English from being in a Spanish speaking home, you picked up English from like those Saturday morning cartoons, but then like in your church being a Spanish speaking church as well, did you find that the grade schools like K through 12 were predominantly Spanish speaking, like with the instructors? Or was that kind of a mix too? Did they like have it where it was like a bilingual school? And then I have a follow-up to that, but I want to ask that first.
Sure. Yeah, I think it all depends on location, but to be honest, man, South Texas it's like 95%, of Hispanic descent.
Sure.
It's heavy in that aspect of the demographics and ethnicity and race part. And so the school that I went to was like a Title I, like hole in the wall school, which I mean, I enjoy, but I'm just trying to paint that picture of. And it was mostly, I think it was like 98% Hispanic. And, they did have the bilingual classes, which was, short for, you gotta better your English speaking skills in order to like, move to a quote unquote regular classroom or different classroom. But anyways, there was both. And eventually I ended up like moving from a bilingual class to like a regular class where everything was in English. And then that's where the English started taking off somewhat.
Sure. So with that, like, because I was curious about too how that played into like I was talking to Thomas Winglinski, and you really talk to anybody, any musician about like, oh, how'd you get into X music? And they were like, oh, well, just like growing up in the house, it was always on. So being in South Texas, and I mean, you also are really great. You're a very diverse player in that you can play classical music. You have a church gig. You play jazz with me all the time, and you've learned like all these different like subgenres of jazz underneath the umbrella, like overarching umbrella. But you've also like worked with like one of our other bands, like Steady O Monday. So was Latin music like part of like the household like music that you grew up around? And then if so, did you feel like that played a role into your like understanding or familiarity with like the jazz idiom?
That's a great question. For me, like jazz was just more of a, it was continued curiosity of like the harmonies I was learning at church, because a lot of gospel music is heavily on the jazz influence side, or they have like these gospel movements which are really like 2-5-1s or some sort of chromatic logic to it.
Sure.
And I was just very curious. I've always been a curious person, and when I'm curious I will explore something and go down the rabbit hole of it. And so when to answer your question, like, no, there really wasn't that much jazz, and I could name a couple of people that could play jazz, but at the extent to which there's a scene like in Austin or in the East Coast or in the West Coast, like California, like it's really hard to compete. A lot of my upbringings were, believe it or not, like 90s R&B, hip hop and rap. What else? Just anything that encompasses like Spanish speaking music, Spanish pop, mariachi music, cumbias, Tejano music, banda music. And so I used to play in a banda for a couple of months, and there's crazy stories of like we're playing for cartels and being like locked in their like mansion ranch, which is ridiculous, but the gig paid well, so I'm not going to complain about that. Anyways,
the final question of every episode is like, what's your craziest gig from hell? And I hope we didn't speak it too soon, but no,
I don't know. I have to think about that, because I know that's been definitely a gig that I'm like, I will always remember that gig. But yeah, as the conversation goes, maybe I could try to remember, or at least paint a more, story gigs or stories from hell, whatever you call it. I don't know what it is. Anyways.
Well, so going from like what was, like, why San Marcos? Why Texas State as the jump? And also why jazz piano? Because obviously, like, you have this understanding and this desire to learn and know more about piano, like growing up in McAllen. But why jazz, and why specifically Texas State, when there are, not at all to put anything down about Texas State, like as a jazz program, because obviously you have like Utah Hamrick there, you have Russell Haight, you have Keith Winking, you have all these like Russ Scanlon, all these amazing faculty, but the jazz program is still relatively new there as opposed to places like University of North Texas and places like that. So why the move specifically to Central Texas?
Yeah. Well, to answer your first question, why jazz? I mean, it's funny because I make the joke where, like I didn't find jazz challenged me. Cliche, right? But no, but seriously, and I think this kind of goes more into like, it's very personal, almost like I want to say faith-based or philosophical, in that, because of my introduction to piano at church, there was such a close emotional connection to, why I was playing or who I was playing for. And, it's like there was something that like it was more than just the 12 notes or the chords I was playing. Like there was a higher purpose or bigger intent to why I was playing. And over the course of, undergrad, like, in undergrad, they drill you like how to, resolve sevens and leading tones. And at the end of the day, it's like, that's just common practice of music. And, you know, for me, like, I don't want to say it just clicked, but it made sense. It's like, yeah, like notes have these tendencies to move up and down, or if you combine these notes, you get this sound, this color. And so I started digging into that rabbit hole of like jazz, and then, you know, the first people that I discovered, or, you know, they've existed, but that I've discovered in my personal journey was Bill Evans, Oscar Peterson. I mean, you can't go wrong with those pillars. And so, you know, I started listening to a lot of them, a lot of Chick Corea, and I don't know, it just, there was something there. I mean, I wasn't classically trained at all, so I was lacking a lot of technique, but I ended up taking one semester of classical piano with a visiting Steinway and Sons piano artist at the university, and I lucked out because she needed students and I needed piano lessons, and so she was basically willing to take anyone. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, I understood sound and how sound works, but I really didn't have, you know, I didn't have piano chops. I could play chords, I could do cool movements, but you know, could I play Czerny Hanon, which is like very standard and typical of like Pianist? Hell no. Like, I didn't know what that was. And so anyways, I started taking lessons with her, and then, you know, just how you approach and think about music, and everyone has their own personal philosophy with music, but it's you know, it's human experience, and that's something that just kind of drew me. It's like, you know, jazz is not about the major seventh or the sharp 11. Like, it's an experience, it's a philosophy, and it's, you know, I guess to take it to a greater extent, it's like a way of living and how you make sense of the world with the colors that you have, which are the 12 notes. And so, you know, I didn't codify it or make sense of it that way, but I'm thinking in retrospect. And it's like, I don't know what made me want to like audition. Like, I'm going to audition on jazz piano for my master's degree. And it was funny because I was getting a lot of, you know, disapproval in my undergrad from some professors, not everyone, but they're like, you can't just switch instruments to another, you know, for a master's degree. Like, you got to stick to trombone. But I found myself making some cash playing gigs on piano and all this stuff, and I was like, I probably have a better chance of making a living playing piano than trombone, which I am not dissing trombone players, because I did my time and I studied it for 4 years, and, you know, I did my recital, and, you know, I did the whole formality of these institutions of social control that you know, they make you do that. And so, you know, I pay homage to that and everything. But, you know, with a piano, it's like there's more work. And so, but the thing is, like, you know, if you want work, you gotta work hard and do your homework. And so I took a long shot. My senior year, my undergrad, I applied to I want to say maybe 2 or 3 schools, and who shall rename nameless, but obviously, you know, Texas State was one of them. And and I don't know how much I want to get into the story of the audition process and everything, but I really didn't know like labels to chords that I was playing. Like, I remember one time, or in the audition, the Texas State audition, Hank Hemsoth, who's currently the one playing there, asked me, "Can you play an E altered chord?" And I was like, "What's that?" And then like he's like, "Oh, it's, you know, it's this," and I knew the sound. I was like, "Oh, I play that chord when I play like this pop music." And he's like, "You play the scale with that?" I was like, "Oh, I think this is the scale that goes with it." So I had the sound in, you know, but it's just I couldn't put the labels to it. And so, you know, why jazz? It's I don't know. I mean, I did know that it was something like I wanted to continue pursuing and just, you know, be curious about and explore. And, you know, my goal wasn't to be like a jazz, like the best jazz pianist or an effective jazz pianist. Like, I was just curious about how this music works. Yeah. And I feel like, you know, I was lucky to even get accepted into a program that, like, you know, where I got an assistantship, and I got like amazing mentors in the process. And so, you know, it worked in that way.
But isn't that so much more beneficial, like for you personally and your growth personally, that you already knew what the sounds were, you just didn't know the labels? So like, at that point, really, like, the sky's the limit of what you could play. You know, it was just a matter of somebody being like putting into words what you already know to be true, or not know to be true, but what you already know to your ear. Whereas like somebody doesn't know anything, like somebody just wants to play, you know, block, root position, you know, triads, and then they're trying to figure out all this other stuff. You're like, no, I already know what that is. I just need you to tell me in labels. I think that puts you so much farther ahead, and it's very representative of your intuition as a player, and which is why like I collaborate with you so much, like why you are like the main person who I've chosen to collaborate with over the past several years and put out 2, and now we're going to put out like 3 more records, you know? So like, yeah, it's just all of that together, I feel like plays to your benefit more than other people who are coming at it from a purely academic sense. You came at it from a sense of like, no, this is already kind of instilled in me. One thing that you were talking about that I wanted to touch on too was that you were like, oh, it's not just these 12 notes. It's like a way of life. It's like, how does this make people feel? And you were talking about too with like the religious aspect. You knew who you were playing for, almost alluding to like a higher power, spiritual or philosophical. So whenever you are playing like jazz gigs outside of a religious institution or a religious setting, does that help you to like picture a narrative or like a story that you're crafting within each tune?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like, and I was having a conversation with Emmett Cohen on just, you know, interpreting a tune, because, you know, there's you know, this can be a whole 2-hour conversation on that, but on the role of, you know, painting a picture or acting or interpreting something, you know, as a pianist, you know, put aside everything that you've been practicing and all your knowledge. Like, you are honoring the music, and the big question is like, how can I make this music, like how can I bring the human into this music? And that's what I feel a lot of people lack. And, you know, one of the things Emmett was saying is like, you almost, he's like, you know, jazz musicians got to be on one level almost a little crazy, and he's like, you got to be an actor, you know, what, like one tune you're over here, you know, Willow weeping for me, and then in the next tune you're talking about the best days of your life and your shining hour and all that stuff. And, you know, someone who exemplifies that so well is like Veronica Swift. She can, you know, she can be crying tears of, you know, this ballad that just makes you move. And in the next instant, you know, she's just snapping her fingers in 2 and 4 and just like, you know, she just scan along like it's no one's business. And it's that type of mindset you got to have. And, you know, I really don't know, like, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, how do you teach creativity? How do you quantify creativity? And how do you teach that? Like, and it's hard because, you know, as an educator, like you want to be able to like pinpoint it. It's like, do these exercises and then you will be creative. And it's like, it's yes and no, but you know, everyone has a different journey. Everyone has a different route. And for me personally, when I don't know if I'm like kind of getting away from the question of like interpreting a tune, but, you know, I really just try to honor the melody. You know, the more and more I transcribe and listen to records, like the more I realize like it's all about melody. It's like these guys are not thinking about, you know, X, Y, and Z. They might be, I don't know, but you know, it's like it's all about melody. And I remember I once had a lesson with well, of the many lessons I had with Russell Hay, and I was like, I asked him, was like, what's one of your biggest takeaways of like just the more you delve into this rabbit hole of jazz? And he was like, it's just all about melody. And I'm like, damn. You know, I'm over here learning my 2/5s, which, you know, you need, but I'm just like, wow, like, you know, to be able to just think melody and interact that way, it's really something else. And I feel like, you know, I don't see jazz musicians as jazz musicians. I see them as artists, you know, as equal as painters and writers and poets, because that's that type of mindset you got to have when playing this music, or honestly any music. It doesn't outside of jazz. You got to get in the vibe, and however you get there is, it's personal, but when you're there, you're there.
Man, there are so many things that you just talked about that like little like cylinders were firing off where I was like, oh, I want to talk about that. And then I was like trying to keep that in my mind. And then you said another thing. I was like, oh, I want to talk about that. But like a few of them, whenever you were like, how do you teach creativity? How do you like instill that? Because as educators, we want to do that. But also as musicians, we want to find our own like unique creativity as opposed to just like transcribing licks and trying to fit them over whatever chord progression they could possibly fit over. But to that point, I almost feel like it's like learning a new word. Whenever we learn new words, if they're like quote unquote bigger words or whatever, the first few times that we put them in conversation after we learn them, it almost feels like we're like forcing them to be, because of the fact that they're not in our vocabulary yet. And even though the person we're having a conversation with might not feel like we're forcing in that word, it still feels like we're kind of like, all right, now we're kind of like forcing this to be part of our vocabulary. But then like a year later, it comes up naturally and it just feels like it's flowing. And it could be just as natural to the person listening as it like a year ago than it is today, like whenever you speak that word in conversation. But for you, finally, it feels natural and it feels like you are using it in a context that more aptly describes like what the point you're trying to convey. I feel like that's the same way with like licks and figuring things out, is that like we transcribe different licks, we transcribe all these things because we want that vocabulary and we want more to pull from, but we're slowly getting the discernment of when that works. And then from an educational standpoint of like trying to teach that creativity, that also feels like, it's like, okay, here's this word and here's what it means. And here's what context you could use it in, X, Y, and Z. But then from a playing standpoint, it's like, oh, here's this lick works. And now we're going to like break it down to like the science of why it works and how it fits over this chord, even if it's like really reaching and it's more out, or if it's like just directly kind of fitting within the change. That feels like a more like academic setting, as opposed to, I just referenced this last episode with Matt, but like there's a conversation between June Lee, the guy who transcribes all the Jacob Collier stuff. And he's like, hey man, why did you put like a B pentatonic over like a C major scale or something like that? How does that make sense to you? And Jacob was like, well, I guess I could explain it for you. It was this, but I didn't think about any of that. I just sang it because it felt right. So it's almost that thing of like, you have to dissect creativity to a T to figure out how it could work over certain areas and harness extra skills, but it's not supposed to live in that academic box. That's really supposed to be an introductory measure, so that way it feels natural in the long run. And then that's where you can start to, as Matt's, one of Matt's mentors from LA would say in the last episode too, you can speak your honesty. You can speak what it is that you have to say. And I feel like you do that very well in a strikingly very small amount of time. But I feel like that's largely in part because you started off with like two of the best jazz pianists to ever do it, like Bill Evans. You can talk about like melody and just not cramming in every note under the sun that could potentially fit over chord changes, but really being selective in crafting like subtle but like incredibly ingenious lines. I don't know, I'm kind of going on now, but
yeah. Now on the topic of Bill Evans, there's a lot of people in academia who do research kind of put Bill Evans in three different periods, like early Bill, like the Conceptions album that everyone digs Bill Evans, and then mid Bill, when he's like playing with Eddie Gomez, and then late Bill when he has like his later trio with like Scott LaFaro. I'm sorry, not Scott LaFaro, Mark Johnson.
Yeah.
And anyways, I personally, I took lessons with Andy LaVerne for about 2 years, who was a student of Bill Evans. And, you know, he would tell me stories of when he would walk into Bill Evans' apartment and he would sit right next to Bill Evans, and, you know, he would tell him all these stories. And anyways, and Andy asked me one time, he's like, you know, oh, like, you know, what's your favorite type of bill? And I'm like, favorite type of bill? What is that? And he's like, yeah, like, you know, mid bill, early bill, late bill. And I was like, I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
And the more I listen to late bill, it's like he saturates so much, you know, of like just harmony, melody, texture. It's just like, you know, I mean, I wasn't sure what exactly he was on or the amount of dosage he was on at that time, but it was just, I feel like, you know, when you're playing, it's a reflection of where you're at, like spiritually, mentally, and just musically at that moment. And, you know, just kind of going back a little bit with, you know, learning a word like in an academic setting versus how you say it naturally in a conversation. It's like, I feel like you got to have the best of both worlds. You know, you gotta, because the way I think about it, it's like music theory is only helpful in that it helps put labels, it helps bring understanding to why things work the way they do.
Sure.
But honestly, outside from that, and I apologize for all the PhD music theorists, outside from that, you know, it's almost, you know, it's good for labels, and but, you know, you can analyze the most, I don't know, technical piece in the world, but at the end of the day, it's all about the performance.
Sure.
And so anyways, I try, as much as I focus on that, I try to like have an understanding of, you know, when I'm working on anything really, like kind of have more of a academic understanding as to why does this work the way it does. Yeah. And then how does that, I don't know, how do I make sense of that, and how do I apply that if I want to my compositions or arranging or playing or improvisation.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like you just got to have, there's got to be a healthy balance of both. There's an analogy of mind, body, and spirit. And I don't know if I talked to you about this, like, you know, informally off, you know, in between gigs and such, but yeah, it's like mind, body, and spirit is compared to melody, harmony, and rhythm. And so mind is harmony, which is, you know, just knowledge, which is the intellectual pursuit of knowledge. Like, you know, you play these 4 notes and you will make this chord.
Yeah.
And you know, you can learn that. But body is like rhythm. It's a feeling. And if, you know, if you don't got a sense of groove or a strong sense of the time, or, you know, any strong sense of like where syncopation falls, or like, you know, strong beats versus weak beats, then, you know, it's going to be hard to like really delve into the music, because it's a time-based language. And then melody is the spirit component. You know, it's like, what makes a good melody? It's like, you know, people have been trying to analyze Mozart melodies and Bach melodies, Beethoven melodies, you know, Brad Meldon melodies. It's like, what makes a melody so great? It's like, you know, you can call it the antecedent and the consequent and all these theory terms, but, you know, it's like, if you hear a good like if there's a good melody, you'll hear it. Yeah. And it's that balance of like, if one aspect of your musicianship is not, you know, if your melody and harmony is so high but your rhythm is low, it's like there, you know, there's going to be a lot of inconsistencies and people will hear that. And so, you know, just trying to like get it all as even as possible, which, I mean, is easier said than done. But
well, I mean, you think like Autumn in New York, right? Like Vernon Duke. Right? That's not a melody that can be recreated, you know, in a laboratory. You know, the ba ba do do do, like the second half of the form, boo do 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 do. Ba ba do do do, boo do 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 dee do do, ba do do way de do, ba do 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 way de de, ba do 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 do, boo do 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 dee do do. Like, no, man, that's this. Like, to your point, that's your spirit. That's something that comes from the deepest place of human experience. Which is why I think it's always like, really interesting how, you know, with both of us being like young people, like, and composing, like to speak and to let in a little bit more information of you know, that I would usually let on. Like when me and you were writing From Dusk Till Dawn, and writing like Dusk and Dawn, and trying to write other tunes in that album, right? Like that was a lot of me just being like super insecure, and being, what, at the time I was like, when we were writing it, I was 20, and then when we recorded, I was 21. And I was really just trying to, and I've had, you know, some difficult life things happen that most people don't know about. But I was like, how come I'm like just not getting melodies that like come to my head? Why can't I just, you know, whip out a melody and say, here it is? And then, like, not to say that I've had too many more life experiences, you know, in those short 3 years since, 3 or 4 years since. But as I've gotten those life experiences, I've been like, oh, it comes from like taking a narrative of something that you experienced and trying to channel that joy, or channel that heartbreak, or channel that fear, or channel like all these different things. So I think it's interesting that, like, as young people, especially during an academic setting, like going to college, either undergraduate, master's, or doctorate, that we're like, oh, we should just be able to come up with all these melodies, you know, and try to be virtuosos. And it's like, no, like that needs to come from a really honest place of the human experience. Yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah, I always tell people, like, you just gotta, you know, because I'll have students ask me, like, you know, how do you get better improvising, or, you know, anything really. And I was like, just start, even if it's badly, like do it badly, like just you gotta take the first step. Like, you know, if you want to play giant steps, play giant steps. I don't care if you play badly, but at least you got that out of your system.
Sure.
And really that's like the first step, which kind of, you know, is a good link to my first album, because I was so scared of doing, you know, my first album as band leader. But, you know, at some point, like, everyone's just got to do something. Like there's a starting point for anything.
Right.
And, you know, it was one of those where it's like, I'm going to go into the studio and I'm going to record this whole project in one day. And so, you know, it was what it was at that moment. And, you know, it's like I said, just do it. And over time is like when you start building those connections and making connections to, like, okay, like this works, this doesn't work, I want to adopt to this style or this, you know, but it's, you know, it's like, it's a process.
Yeah. So specifically with that album though, why the tunes that you picked? Because obviously it wasn't just like, you know, it was like, I'm going to go into the studio, I'm going to do this album, it's going to be a marker of where I am at in this time, and then I'll do more. You know, I think you and I have very, very similar mindsets about making records and kind of leaving that, I don't want it to be so prideful to say like legacy, but to leave like a documentation.
Yeah, that was the word I was going to use.
Sure. So even though it was this kind of thing of like, you know what, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to do, and I'm going to prepare, but I'm going to do where I'm at right now. Why the tunes that you picked? Because you did, you know, obviously Waltz for Debbie's, like got the Bill Evans influence, Danny Boy, like I would assume almost speaks to the spiritual component of things. Then you have things like Green Dolphin Street and Olio, and then Last Minute Blues, and then Like Someone in Love. So where did the selection of the song choices come from in your programming?
Yeah, I think ultimately it was just a collection of things that I felt comfortable playing, or that I knew I could express myself at as best as I could at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you know, it's funny because you mentioned like the charts, and I was like, I forgot what charts I've played, but I have some CDs here, and so I wanted to look at them. But yeah, a lot of these were really, you know, things that I connected to personally, and things at this moment where I could probably execute just walking into a studio and playing.
Sure.
So, whether it was going to be effective or not, it's another question. But I mean, I knew I could go into a studio and just play these tunes down the list and get some sort of product out. Yeah. And so, but aside from that, it was like, I was looking, I was looking at my liner notes, and it says, it is more of my feeling about my basic conception of jazz structure, melodies, and how all those fall on one another. And, it's so much that kind of led up to this album, because, from someone that coming from, a town where like jazz is unheard of, and probably, I don't want to say looked down, but it's like they call it elevator music or wallpaper music. They don't find much value in it. And, that's nothing against the people, but it's just, I find value in it, and that's what matters to me. Yeah. And so, there was a lot of personal connections to the album, because, it's like, I really didn't know jazz or, labels, and I didn't go through the whole route of like parents listening to jazz and Frank Sinatra and Ella. Like, I didn't go through any of that crap. I just, I heard the word jazz when I was 15 years old, and I just decided to be curious and like explore it. Like that, that's where it began. And so it was nice to have something to document, like, my 10 years of exploring piano. And I wouldn't even want to call it jazz, just exploring piano in general. As the years go, you get more comfortable with your instrument, the voice or piano, whatever you're studying. Sure. But, I feel like for me, it was something I wanted to document at that moment. Because this was recorded the summer before I left to Colorado for doctorate school. And so I did kind of want to put a little stamp on like, this is what I did here in Texas before doctorate school. Yeah. And so I wrote a blues, and I featured Matt on it, because I remember, when I first started playing around Austin, like, Matt was like going to school, like for his master's. It was like his last year of his master's first, and then going to his first year of doctorate, Ben. And so I wanted to, kind of tie in like everything that I was doing there at Austin at that moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, it was especially special for me to be able to hear those tunes that you were doing, because on the gigs that we would play together, I mean, we were playing like, outside of COVID, we're playing 5-6 nights a week, sometimes double headers, sometimes triple headers, despite our caffeine levels. And, to be able to, some might say it was like a singer cop out, but I would say, hey, do you want to play one? Just because it's like, at the same time, like, I want to be able to, I could play the whole set, but I want you to be able to use that time as well to do just like solo stuff if we were doing a duo gig, or if we were doing a trio gig, to be able to play tunes that weren't vocal tunes. And so for me, whenever specifically, I would like, whenever we were at Fleming's, and I'd be like, all right, do you want to play one? And it was when you were gearing up for that. So you'd play Danny Boy, and you'd play Waltz for Debbie all the time. And I remember that giving me such energy, and also making me think a lot as I was sitting there listening to you, because it wasn't just like, all right, get on my phone, tune out, go order a drink. It was like really in-depth listening to you, and to be able to hear what you were doing with altering melodies and like adding in things to make it like a unique and personal interpretation. I was like, oh man, like that's what I need to be doing. And then that ended up influencing how I tried to approach the next record, which we did together. Obviously, it was Between Love and Fascination. But so back to you, and talking about how you did that just before you went to grad school, as kind of like a stamp of like, all right, finished my master's, did some years of gigging, now I'm going to go back and get another degree. How did you feel that, obviously undergrad and master's was very different for multiple different reasons, but how did you feel like your master's degree and your doctorate degree felt? How was it similar? How was it different now that you were starting and completing 2 degrees on the same instrument in the same genre?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, I was thankful because I really didn't think I was going to get into any doctorate program, because a lot of doctorate programs, you know, people think, you know, tickling ivories is something easy, but, you know, jazz doctorate positions are hard to come by, and assistantships too. Like they're not easy. Like there's so many killing players out there that, you know, someone can just come and, you know, sweep the audition and just take take the assistantship. And so, you know, and there is that spirit of competition that's always been there in jazz with like brass bands and syncopated orchestras. So it's like I like that spirit of competition thing. But you know, to answer your question, it was like it was the same 12 notes but through a different lens, or the same style, same grooves. You know, obviously I was introduced to new people, new bands, and new ways of thinking, but it was I really do feel it's a lot about perspective, because, you know, if you're just in your little, if you're just like looking through the same lens always and forever, it's like, you know, there's so much art out there, and there's so many valuable opinions and thoughts that it's like, you know, you're gonna die like never knowing that, you know, all the gold that there is in this world. Sure. And so anyways, moving to Colorado was a rude awakening in that, you know, it was, well, rude, I guess bittersweet is a better word, but, you know, it was great because it was like a new life change, especially weather-wise. Like, you know, it's just, oh, it was great. Anyways, but yeah, you know, that and just being like away, you know, it was like my first time like thousands of miles away from family. Yeah. And so that was a bit hard. And I mean, when I mean family, I mean my blood family, but also like my musical family. Sure. And so, you know, because we get so comfortable, and, you know, and being in one place, and that's not bad, right? But, you know, if there's opportunity somewhere and you want to take it, then do it. Right. And so I did that, and it was great. Like, I mean, I'm taking a year off right now, thinking of applying again, but you know, there's great faculty there, and it's just, you know, you hear about different people's experiences, and, you know, I would, you know, without reservation, I would recommend anyone who's even considering school to possibly explore or figure out what's there. But I totally forgot about your question. I'm just rambling. So
no, you're good. I mean, it was just about like the differences and the similarities and like the experience of doctorate school versus, you know, master's.
Yeah, they, you know, UNC has a huge program. Like they I think the year that I was there, they had 100 jazz majors in total. It's like, it's ridiculous. They got a vocal jazz program. You know, they got, I forgot how many big bands they got. I think they got 3 big bands, and like, I think I mean, if someone is watching the, you know, this, they can correct me, but there was like, you know, there was at least 8 combos or something or more. So, you know, there was a lot of opportunity for playing, and then informal jam sessions and all this stuff. But it was just like, you're living in this world, you know, when you go to school for music, like you're just living in this little fantasy world of like, you're always playing with groups, with big bands. And I think Ben Trish mentioned that, like, one of the perks of being in school, it's like you're always playing.
Right.
And it's, you know, that's how you get better. Like there's so much trial and error happening every day when you're playing that, you know, it's like those are things you really don't pick up like every day when you're out of school. And so there are perks to that, because, you know, when you're in combo rehearsal, you're not only you working on music, but you're you know, there's critique. And that's always good, because, you know, if you don't take it personally, then that can help you in the long run with things. But there's always this constant, like, you know, they build you, they tear you, they build you, they tear you. And honestly, like change is not easy. And so, it's a great school. There's just, I mean, I don't know if there's something more specific you wanted me to talk about it, but I know the Lab band got to go to Jazz and Lincoln Center to compete at the Jazz. And that was dope. Like that was like pretty life-changing. I don't know if you want me to continue with that or go to a different part.
I mean, this is your time. I'm open to listening to anything that you want to say, but I think that is an incredible opportunity. I would love to hear about that with like the Jazz at Lincoln Center thing, because we had just missed each other. Like you were like, hey, I'm going to New York in January, and I was like, I'm going to New York in January, and we literally by one day, because I was there for Jazz Congress, and then you were there for that competition. But what was that like? I mean, just like, because I was there purely from a standpoint of being there to try to sit in or just at least go check out shows and jam sessions, and then during the day be at all those different seminars. But you were there to play, so I guess you were in the appellate room, right?
Oh, there was two of them. I think the Rose Room, I think that's like the main,
right.
And then the other room that you just mentioned, that like has like the see-through glass to the
windows, to the view of Lincoln Center. Yeah,
the combo played there, and then the big band played in the Rose Room.
Oh, wow! Okay.
Which Witten calls the House of Swing, which I think is funny. I was like, so many implications.
That's an incredible room, though, man. Like that's where I saw Kurt play, do his radio drama, The Big Blind.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's an incredible room. Yeah, but I mean, both rooms are incredible. But yeah, man, that whole place just feels like we're in somewhere special, Yeah.
There is this like, and it was just, it's like I said, it's like the experience. You just being there, being around Witten, being around just like the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. I think Benny was there. And like just people that have, added or contributed to just, the history of jazz in the last like 20, 30, 40 years, like are there. And you're just like, whoa, it's almost mind blowing in a way. But on another level, it's like, they're human beings just like us, but it's just their contribution, contribution to the art form. And, I respect people like that because it's not easy. And so,
it was that too. It's crazy because of the fact that like you're both mind blown that you're seeing these people in person, because of the fact that you feel like they have contributed so much, like an immeasurable amount to the craft and to really to the cause, if we want to like, I mean, I would think, jazz music is a cause. But then at the same time, just like you said, they're human, and it humanizes them because you're like, oh, that's a human being, and they breathe, eat, sleep, bleed the same way that I do, and they're right here in front of me, and I'm listening to them talk, and it's not this where I'm in my home and I'm listening to them play on my computer. It's like, oh, they're right here in front of me, and it does. For me, that experience, and maybe it was just like the vibe of Jazz Congress, but it felt like a very communal experience. It did feel like, in a sense, that we were there to like listen to them talk, but on another hand, it did feel like it was like, oh no, we're all part of the same family. We're all like doing the same thing. Just some of us are further along than others, and we're just trying to be here and be humble and take a seat and listen to masters talk,
Yeah, I know. I like to give the analogy. It's like, we're disciples for this cause that you just mentioned. And it's funny because Witten said in the Q&A, it's like, so I forget who, but someone asked, one of the college students there was like, why move to New York City? Or, because everyone is moving here. And he's like, man, we need you wherever you're at. Like, if you're in the East Coast, if you're in the West Coast, if you're in the South, like, we need you everywhere, which reinforces the idea of like discipleship and, go forth and spread the cause, or, spread the love, which is, I mean, I like to think of it that way because, it's like, yes, it's, the Mecca of, and like, there is so much activity going on there, but in reality, it's like not every, if every jazz musician would have moved to the East Coast, like, where would there be jazz in Texas, in, Idaho? I don't know, Wisconsin, Wyoming. You need people everywhere. And so anyways, it was nice to hear that. But at some point I do want to move to New York for a couple of months, even if it's just for a couple of months, and just live the vibe, like just be there, walk down Harlem, and just like be there where they were, like everyone else was living and like walking through, and very different times obviously, but just to kind of go and experience that.
Yeah. Well, so man, all of that to say, like, so coming up from South Texas, getting to Texas State, learning the lay of the land of jazz, getting that degree, then playing gigs all the time, really hitting it hard, always on the hustle, teaching a little bit, then putting out a record, going to grad school, then coming back, being back in the scene, and now working on the next record. So how do you feel like all of that experience and your living and learning, both from like things that you liked and things that you wish you could have done better, because obviously we feel that we could do that on records. How do you feel like all of that experience, both records and life, has influenced what you want to do and what you want to get across on this new record?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it's like as each day passes by, I'm a little more clear as to how I want to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find a good way to phrase it that is like clear. But yeah, like I try to be as clear as possible with my approach or my intention. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not answering your question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're good. So like with this new record, I know that you're trying to get a little bit more across, or from what I have understood, a little bit more of the Nat King Cole vibe. So what was that transition like, of like going from really, I mean, I'm not going to say that you are no longer influenced by Bill Evans, because everyone kind of knows you as like, oh yeah, he's got strong Bill Evans vibes, but like transitioning over to the Nat King Cole side of things, why Nat King Cole? And is that like a central point of the album, or is it just supposed to be like, oh, here are some like attributes of his playing that I want to...
Man, Nat King Cole's the man. Like, just and what kind of triggered that was I took 2 jazz history seminars with Dr. Brian Casey. He's getting his second doctorate degree, and I admire him so much. Very knowledgeable man, and he works as the primarily as like the history, jazz history professor at University of Northern Colorado. And I took a course, not we, because he was a teacher, but I took a course on the first decades of jazz, and which is, just like the darkest history of jazz as you can paint it, and the realities of Afro-Americans and living in the early 1900s. But then and that's kind of where, we really didn't mention Nat King Cole, because we stopped closer to like the late 1920s-ish. But then we took a jazz seminar class, and, we had to write a term paper, and I was just listening to a lot of Nat. And, funny you speak about Bill, because, the more research I've done about Nat, it's like Nat was like this foundation to like people like Oscar Peterson, Ahmad Jamal, Bill Evans. He credits him as like just, listening to a lot of Nat and admiring Nat. And I would probably, push the boundaries a little further and say, Robert Glasper has some Natisms in his playing, because he rips a lot of stuff from Ahmad Jamal. And Ahmad Jamal, has a lot of that spirit of Nat. But I coined the term like the Nat King Cole like style, and there are certain things that Nat King Cole does, and he gets talked about as a singer, but he's just, his pianistic abilities are overshadowed, or his contribution that he did for the trio that followed after that. And in terms of like jazz trio, not many were doing what he was doing specifically you know, when he was beginning in California.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was just a mix of like, I've always been fascinated about singers and just their ability to like create melodies and you know, just how they express melody. And, you know, Nat, not only was he a killing pianist, he was just a killing singer. He was so great at both things.
Yeah.
And it just fascinated me. It's like, he has such a strong connection to his piano with the voice. And it's like, I don't, you know, there's a lot of, you know, I can name many people that have that strong connection, but when it comes to like, you know, early jazz piano trio, I think of Nat King Cole. And there, you know, there's so many things about Nat that I really like, you know, want to adopt to my playing. And which is why this album is kind of, you know, paying tribute to that in some way, because, you know, I went from like, you know, learning jazz to Bill Evans. It's like I miss so much history, like, you know, and for me, it's like I like to really delve into one person and really get that style, really nail it down, because, you know, a lot of it just, you know, you're going to see a lot of the same things with other players, just in a different way. And so, yeah, for me, it was just, I mean, it was just like the life that Nat King Cole lived. It was, or for any Afro-American at the time, it's like, you know, there's all these, like, they had to deal with like the politics of race and just oppression. And, you know, that's stuff that you still see today. It's like, it's gotten better, but it hasn't really changed.
Yeah.
You know, and I would probably even say better is an overstatement, but you know, just the harsh realities Nat had to go through, and the vehicle in which he used to express himself, obviously his voice and his piano playing. It's like, it's, you know, I don't want to be biased, but it's just as human as it can get. It's like, he's not trying to like throw the most complicated altered licks. Like, this dude's just thinking about melody, and he is just trying to honor the melody, honor the tune. Yeah. And he does that so well. And, you know, for me, it's like, I don't know why I found that connection so like close to him, but this next record is going to have a lot of Nat-isms for sure. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, is that specifically with tunes that are more iconic to his songbook, or influenced by records or tunes on records that he's made? Or is that also in original tunes that you feel like you have wanted to write in the style of his trio?
Yeah. I think it's a mix of everything. I do have some originals. What else do I have? You know, it's a lot of originals or arrangements in the style of Nat. Sure. But, you know, with my, like, it's still David. It's still my interpretation.
Right, of course.
So it's really, it's not like I ripped this off the record. It's like I studied it, I understood it, I synthesized it, and now I am producing a product to, you know, honor that. Yeah. And so it, you know, a couple of tunes on there. There are some really iconic ones that I do want to get on there, but I don't know, for the sake of time, if I can, I might release them as like singles, like Mona Lisa. Such a beautiful melody. Yeah. But, you know, I was thinking of maybe doing that like solo piano, but release it as a single or something like that.
I think that would be super cool to like hear you capture in a piano sense, like the essence of his voice and his phrasing of his vocal quality in your like piano playing.
It's so ridiculous. Like, I had, you know, sometimes I'll try to play along with like his records and try to follow his voice with my melody. And it's just, you know, he's not like writing down, like, I'm going to be, you know, like half a millisecond late on this lyric. It's like, it's just flowing. But his sense of time is so strong. So sometimes it's really hard to notate like what he's really singing rhythmically. Because it's just, you know, I think of singers, it's like, once you got your sense of time strong, like you can kind of float over the time and you do what you want, but also imply a strong pulse of some kind at some point. Right. You know, I don't know if I'm making up my own like vocal pedagogy, but I see that with pianists, vocalists. It's like, you know, they know exactly where they're at. But until you can play in time, then you can do that.
Well, speaking to that, I mean, I remember like us like trying to figure out what we were going to do, not to go back to a similar analogy, but what we were going to do with Dusk and Dawn. And I was like, man, I really want it to feel like very rubato. I want it to feel very like we're following each other. And you had kind of given me, not kind of, like you gave me these pointers of like, because we had worked so much together, you're like, I know what you're saying. I know what you want to go for, but we still need to have some basic sense of structure. And then like, once we have that, then you can start to, like on my end, you were like, you can start to give that illusion of freeness by understanding where you're at in time, but freely kind of pushing and pulling to create that effect that I want. And I remember you saying that in our house on Allen Street in San Marcos in the middle of both of our degrees. And
we lived together for like 3 months or something like that.
No, it was like a year, man. Maybe it felt like 3 months. But yeah, man, I'm super psyched to listen to that full record and hear everything that's on it. Yeah. Well, it is Sunday. And I know sorry, go ahead.
Well, let's make a PSA, public service announcement. I was thinking of having you on my album. Christian, would you like to be on my album?
Well, I need you to get down on one knee, David.
Oh, boy. Well.
Well, man, I know that it's Sunday and it's a school night, so I don't want to keep
past my bedtime.
Past your bedtime. But okay, so I did want to ask those final two questions that we always ask in every episode. So the first of which is, what records would you say right now, if people could go out and listen to anything that you prescribe? It could be one record, it could be two. If you're torn between, what would you say people need to go check out, right this very instant?
Yeah, so I would urge everyone to go check out Billie Holiday's Solitude album. Sorry, I was trying to remember the album.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been trying to force myself to do more, and not force myself, but it was this like mini revelation of like, I just got to listen to singers for like 3-4 months. Yeah. Just saturate myself, because there are some moments where I catch myself, doing the mechanics of jazz and just, playing what I already know. But, to be able to transfer like, the spirit, the vocal part of you into an instrument, especially for pianists, it's so easy to run our fingers. It's like, I got to listen to vocalists for 3 months. And I got the idea from Emmett Cohen, where he was like, you know what, you should probably listen to vocalists for 3 months. And he was telling me that Wynton, there was a time where like Wynton just listened to like one vocalist for like 6 months, just that. And it's a lot of it you just subconsciously pick up in your playing. And yeah. I mean, you can go and like analyze and see how they're floating over the time or their isms, but I would suggest that as people like to say, a good oldie but goodie. And it's, I mean, just the voice of Billie Holiday, so raw, so genuine. Yeah. Speaking of the human, it's like, it's just her. It's not, she's not trying to put on a show, although she does it so well.
Yeah.
Another album, trio album that I was soaking all day yesterday was the Bill Charlap trio. I like to call them the Washington duo, Peter Washington and Kenny Washington.
Yeah.
And it's called S Wonderful.
Okay.
It's such a great album. And, talk about the most lyrical pianist of, I would probably say that's alive today, just Bill Charlap. Like the way he's able to voice melody, or the way he's able to voice his melodies, it's just so, it's, speaking of just being able to vocalize as much as you can. And, the theme of these two is just like, being as genuine, as true as you are, but still it's like the art form is there. The art is there. And, they're not playing for a bar. Although they do, and they have, but it's like, it goes past that. It's like they're playing for history.
Yeah.
And although they don't think of it at the moment. It's like, you know, it's there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I urge everyone to go check those out, and it will be, you will gain some years of life.
For sure. And then the final question of every episode is we all have gigs from hell where everything goes sideways. So if you can think back, and I don't know, it may have been one that we did together, but if you can think back, what is the standout gig from hell experience that you have?
Dude, oh my gosh. Well, this isn't the gig from hell, but my first gig ever was at a Dairy Queen. And I was playing trombone and piano, and we ran out of repertoire like within 15 minutes. And we had like an hour to finish. And then like the news was supposed to come and film us, and we didn't have repertoire, so we just started repeating the same 15 minutes. And it was just, you know, 3, 4 college dudes like just trying to make some cash, and we didn't even get paid. We just got like paid chicken nuggets at a Dairy Queen, which is really cheap. Anyways, the gig from hell, and I don't think anything has topped this, but I used to play in a banda, and they're called the banda in South Texas was called Banda XL. The way I like to describe that to people that aren't familiar with the style is it's like polka music, but it really doesn't do that justice. Go listen to it. And you bank in those gigs because a lot of that music is associated with like, you know, mafia, cartel, like,
Sure.
And just everything that encompasses that lifestyle environment. And so there was one Saturday night where it was the World Cup and Mexico was playing against China, and some dude hired the banda. You know, it's a 60-piece band, so they hired us to go play 2 hours. And think about it, you know, this banda probably charges $1,600 an hour. And so this guy booked us for 2 hours, and he didn't even have an address. It was just a pin drop somewhere, like in the middle of nowhere in a ranch. And so you drove in, and you had to drive at least like 2 miles just to get to his ranch. It was just like a whole lot of nothing.
Sure.
And then when you get there, you see, you know, 4 black Cadillacs, all the same tint model, horses, a mansion, a maid, you know, a gambling table outside, and then we're playing. And then after the 2 hours, he's like, hey, can you play for 2 more? And so we're like, oh, you know, that kind of caps our repertoire.
Sure.
And so we do the 2 hours, and, you know, in the 4th hour, he was on every substance you can think about. He had a gun in his hand. And then he went up to the singer and like rapped his. He was so intoxicated and under the influence of all these drugs that, you know, he wasn't thinking much of it. But he went up to the singer and he had the gun and he was giving him a hug and singing as he went. And then he shot a bullet in the air. Oh no! So the whole band stopped playing. It was like, you know, just music and then no music. And then one of my friends goes to the restroom and calls the cops because he didn't want us to go. So we stayed there and we were just like, we don't know what to do. And so my friend calls the cops in the restroom. He's like, hey, I called the cops, don't worry. And then the cops never show up. It's like this dude had them bought. I don't know what it was. Anyways, we were playing from, I think, like 7 p.m. and no one left till 6 a.m. And there was a time, like he was basically threatening us to stay there. And there was a time where like he was so drunk that he asked us to play the same song 7 times. And it was like the same like 8-minute song 7 times, just looping over because he wanted that. And we were getting paid, but you know, at the end of the gig, this guy like he just hands the band leader a bag of cash.
A bag of cash.
A bag of cash of like, which is what we were, you know, what we quoted him for the night. And I was not dead, and I am really thankful for that.
Were you playing bone on this one? Were you playing trombone?
I was playing valve trombone on this one, and you know, but it was just like, it was scary because we called cops, law enforcement, no one showed up.
Yeah.
And, you know, the closest way out of there was like a 2-mile run into the ranch. And it's like, he had guns there. He had everything, maids and other friends that looked like real scary bodyguards. And you didn't want to, you wanted to be in a position where you were just compliant, because you didn't know what to expect. I was thinking about running like the back of the ranch and just calling my sister. But that was, you know, I'm sure there's been crazier gigs, but that's been,
I don't know, man. That seems like the craziest gig I think I've ever.
when I drove home, it was already Sunday, sunrise, and I was like in my Banda suit all sweaty, and I still had to like go home and change for church. And my mom was like, how was work? And I was like, oh, it was fun. I think I'm never going to forget that gig. And I don't think anyone else is at, you know, that went there. And so when I talk to my friends about it, it's like, you know, oh, do you remember that one gig? He's like, oh yeah, wow. Yeah.
That was the one.
But yeah, I don't recommend anyone putting themselves in situations like that. If you can avoid them, please do.
If you can avoid them. Well, man, thank you so much for being on, man. I love you so much, my brother, and I'm so glad to be able to talk with you and share this with everybody. Do you have anything that you want to plug? Do you have like physical CDs? Do you have like Instagram, like stuff like that you want to plug people to go over and check you out?
Yeah, I still have a couple of physical CDs of my album. Sorry, it's backwards.
No, it's good.
Of Preamble, and so I do have hard copies for sale. Anyone is interested.
Awesome.
And I'm trying to get rid of this. No, just kidding. No, just kidding. No, I'm actually waiting for an autograph. So, I think if you just write on your like camera, it'll transfer over here. So
okay. Sounds good. Could you send me like a DocuSign? I'll sign it over.
Yeah, but no, I got physical copies of these, and so if anyone wants to, you know, buy some cardboard with my hands on it and a CD with the three-boy trio. I think when I had a photo shoot for this, I think it was you that I wanted to put the trio in like the cover, but then you said it looked like a Christian rock, like a Christian boy band or something.
Man, like a country. Well, it was because, and no shame. I mean, we love the guy, but I think it was because Ben was wearing jeans and like boots. So I was like, I don't know.
Anyways, yeah, if anyone's interested in purchasing.
And what's your Instagram handle? Mesquitic.
At Mesquitic.
Okay, awesome. And I'll put that down below so everybody can check it out. But awesome, man. Well, David, thank you so much again for being on, and I will see you in less than 12 days because we'll get together safely, so we can do a couple quick little rehearsal things. But yeah, everybody tune in on Thursday, November the 12th, and you'll hear David playing lots of tunes, lots of solos, and lots of noodling to make me sound more intelligent than I actually am talking between tunes. It'll be great.
Playing tunes. Okay. Okay. Let's do it.
Something like that. Whatever you want. Whatever.
Sure.
You want. All right, man. Well, thank you so much again. Be safe. I'll see you very soon.
All right, dude.
Bye.